Welcome to Lesson 13A, and this semester is flying by. In an earlier lesson, we discussed wealth distribution. In recent years, the term income inequality has been used more and more. Income inequality can be defined as the difference between the average incomes of the wealthy and the poor. Economists tell us that the income gap is increasing in most countries. This statement is easy for them to make, but how do they know? This is a good time to pause, answer question 1, look at the objectives, maybe even go on to question 2, and then come back and work through this with me. Suppose you are an economist and that you are given the task of measuring income differences between the rich and the poor all over the world. Can you survey everyone in the world? How would you proceed to measure the income differences? A couple of thoughts about question 1. First off, we cannot survey everyone, but it is possible that we could survey a small subset of the population. So the objectives for this lesson include many words that you need to put in your glossary, flashcards, Google Docs, something that makes these stand apart and understood and recallable by you. Starting with a sample. A sample is a subset of a population. A statistic. A statistic is a numerical summary that is from a sample. Most statistical studies use representative samples to make inferences about populations. And let that one soak in a lot. This is a hard concept to mull over, that a statistical study is probably going to use a sample that's going to represent a population. And when we do our sample well, we can make inferences based on what we learn about the sample. We can infer something or some things, thoughts, concepts, ideas about the population. Some statistical variables are called explanatory, while others are called response. Some are quantitative, others are categorical. You will be able or begin to be able to describe how a statistical study uses sample data to make inferences about a population. Yes, a sample, well done, can be used to make inferences about a population. We're going to describe how to gather a representative sample used in a statistical study. We're going to describe the most appropriate statistics to compute in a study. And we're going to distinguish between explanatory and response variables and between quantitative and categorical variables. It is not possible to measure the incomes of everyone on Earth. It is possible to collect information from a smaller group of diverse people from countries all over the world. Remember, though, we would need to convert incomes to a common unit of currency to be able to make these comparisons. If you haven't already hit pause and worked on questions 2 and 3, go ahead and do so. Work on those with good effort, and then come back and we'll talk through these together. What do we call the whole group that we are interested in? What do we call the representative group that we actually collect the information from? The whole group is the population. The representative group that we actually collect our information from is the sample. Recall earlier, in our earlier discussions about census data and income levels in the United States. Now let's design a statistical study about the income of persons from the entire world. Part A, how would you gather a sample of people so that their incomes are representative of those in the world's entire population, and describe a process that researchers could use. There are many different answers you could put on this question. Something you might put would be that we would want to gather information from as many countries as possible. We need to make sure that we include females, males from a broad spectrum of social and ethnic groups. And you fill in the blanks. What else would you like to know, and how broad would you like to be? Part B, to measure income inequality, we decide to divide the sample into 3 economic groups: lower, middle, and upper. These groups are defined based on their ability to provide themselves with basic needs like food, clothing, shelter, and luxury items. How could we summarize the incomes in each of these 3 groups, describe a mathematical process that would provide a simple numerical summary value for the income levels in each group? Something we could do is to convert the incomes from the sample to a common unit of measure, like United States dollars or like euros. Then we could compute the average income for each of these groups, the average for the lower, the average for the middle, the average for the upper. But remember, first, we got to convert to something common. Part C, how would we confirm or refute the economist's claims that the income gap is widening? The gap between rich, the upper class, and poor, the lower class, can be measured by subtracting the summary values of these 2 groups. The income data would need to be collected and analyzed repeatedly over time to determine whether the income gap is actually widening or narrowing or possibly staying the same. If you have not already worked on at least question 4, maybe 4, 5, and 6, go ahead and hit pause and work on those and then come back. For question 4, there are 2 types of studies that researchers conduct by gathering data from population members. In a census, data are gathered from the entire population. And remember, when you write these words in your glossary or flashcards, write words that help you to remember the details or things that make sense to you. Like every 10 years, we do a census in the United States. And that census is an attempt to gather information from the entire population. In a statistical study, a representative sample is gathered and results are used to make inferences. And these are conclusions based on evidence. So I'd get a card for a statistical study. I'd get a card for inferences that are conclusions based on evidence. But these inferences are about for the entire population. Summary values computed from sample data are called statistics. They are the summary values, and they are computed from sample data, and they're called statistics. In our study, is our study a census or a statistical study? And explain your answer. In the study that we are talking about, it is a statistical study because we are using data from a sample. Part B, what statistic is or are being computed in our study? Well, we are computing an average from the incomes of each of the classes. On question 5, the flashcards continue. When conducting a statistical study, observations that change from one sample member to the other are called variables. They are observations that change from one sample member to the next, and they're called variables. In the study, 2 variables were considered. What are the 2 variables in this study? Well, one variable is economic class, and the other variable is the income. Classify each variable as quantitative or categorical. Categorical is like a box or a bucket. An economic class is a bucket. You either were in the upper, the middle, or the lower. But income is quantitative. It's a number, and we can take that number and do stuff like an average. Number 6, there are 2 primary types of summary values. Wow, the words are just rolling in. And the summary values, the 2 types are the 2 primary ones. We can calculate percentages or proportions, and we can calculate averages. Part A says which summary value is most appropriate for a quantitative variable, a percentage or an average. Percentage or an average. For quantitative, the most appropriate is going to be finding an average. But part B, which summary value is most appropriate for a categorical value, a percentage or an average. And for a categorical variable, talking about how many are in each of the buckets, a percentage is going to be best because a percentage or a proportion can talk to you about what all is in each or how much is in each bucket. If you have not hit pause and worked on questions 7 and 8, now is the time to do so. And then when you have some answers, come back and let's talk through these together. Question 7 says sometimes when 2 variables are measured in a study, one is called the explanatory variable, while the other is called the response variable. And I like to go back to our X and Y, and one may explain, and the other may be the response. The researchers may think that the values of the explanatory variable may partially explain the differences in the values observed in the response. Caution, I'm going to put this one in red, caution. This possibility does not imply a cause and effect relationship. Part A, of our 2 variables in this study, which is the explanatory variable? Well, we think income would explain economic class. But it could work the other way. Your economic class could keep you in your certain income bracket. For the sake of this study, we'll go ahead and say that the income you're making is going to put you in whatever bucket for economic class. Part B, which is the response variable. Well, income explains class because we define the classes based on their income. Class explains income because sometimes people are placed in their economic class whenever they're born, and they may be likely to stay there. So I'm kind of going back and forth on this one and back and forth on this one because I really would like for you to think about it. Which way do you want to write this? And I just want you to play around with these words of explanatory and response. Whichever way you feel, whichever way you feel that you would like to write this, then write it. I'm going to go ahead and say income because we're taking the income and then we're defining the ranges of our economic class, like upper, middle, and lower. But part C, why do you feel that the explanatory variable might explain the response? And that's why I was saying, and sorry I'm jumping around on this, why do you feel that the explanatory might explain the response? I'm going to go ahead and pick that the income is going to explain our economic class because we have divided our buckets that way. If your range of salary is here, you go there. If it's another, you go there. But it is very true that the economic class you are born into may very well determine your income levels, capabilities, ceilings. So write down whatever you like the best, and then join me on question 8. Question 8 asks, is there any chance that a statistical study such as this can lead to incorrect inferences about the entire population? If we set up our study really well, and we'll talk more about what that'll look like, then we can infer what we find out from our sample applies to the population. But this question is asking, could we have done it wrong, or could we have incorrect inferences? And sure, our data is based on samples, not an entire population. So it's very possible that incorrect inferences could result. The samples that we select may not be really representative of each country, and we may not have enough countries in our sample. Lots of things could happen to cause this, or cause us to have incorrect inferences about our population. So I would go back and I would grab my flashcards that I've been making this entire lesson. I would grab my glossary or my Google Doc, and now I would go back and make sure that what I have written down and what this list at the end of our lesson has are all complete. And it says in the words below are the vocabulary terms used in this lesson for your statistics dictionary. Note that the terms are not alphabetized because they're placed with their associated terms, like quantitative and categorical. And so if you look at information here, we have the population sample data, census and statistical, the statistical inference, the statistic, and a variable, quantitative, categorical, response, and explanatory. Make sure you have complete information on your flashcards and glossary so that you'll be able to study best for this homework and your next test. This concludes lesson 13A. Go check your syllabus to see if you have more for this week. And I'll either see you in a video soon or see you in a video next week.